It took a Buddhist monk to really convert me and make me a better Christian. Nobel Peace Prize winner Thich Nhat Hanh. I was diving into his works and reading his words and the way that he was teaching another. And if you're not familiar with him, he's one of those powerful spiritual leaders, yet another one that we have lost in 2022. And by lost, I don't mean we're still searching for him. I mean he passed on to life everlasting. He was exiled from his home in Vietnam for voicing his opposition to the war in the 60s. The words that I read are much more well-written than what I'm about to deliver to you, but I need you to imagine the war-torn Vietnam in the 60s, and people are being loaded into the back of a truck, and they've been taken from their homes, they're being removed. And as this final act, a soldier spits on one of the men being loaded into this truck. Now, naturally, the man's reaction is anger. But Thich Nhat Hanh steps in, and this man who had been spat upon wants to know how it is that this act of hostility and disrespect, this ugliness, this violence, doesn't make the monk mad. Why doesn't it make him want to strike back? Now, in the pages that follow, there's this description of how the anger and the rage inside, that anger that comes from being spat upon, the hate from that other person, the soldier, how it becomes our hate, our anger, and how it gains control over us if we absorb it. And we can allow that action, the single action, all of those actions, to define our reactions and our emotions, our future actions, and who we are and who we become. That soldier, that moment, his anger, his ignorance, will continue to have complete control and define that man from that moment on if the man hands over the power, allowing that anger from the moment to define him and any moment that follows. And the more I read and the deeper my thinking and my engagement with this book, the more I connected, the more I thought, well, dang Skippy, how dense have I been? The heart of the nonviolence message of the gospel. I was raised knowing this. I was taught this. And somehow the impact had to come to me from the language of a Buddhist monk. There was something so right, so ironic, and so iconic that the truth of the message of Jesus Christ had to come from a modern-day Vietnamese monk so that I could understand Jesus of Nazareth. That just works for me. It really worked. Jesus of Nazareth and his insistence upon nonviolent resistance in the face of evil wasn't just something he taught or proclaimed. It was something he lived. He lived it out when he came face to face with soldiers. Now, in that moment, they didn't spit on him. They didn't load him into a truck. But they arrived that night to take him away. And when they arrived, Jesus refused to take up weapons, and he refused to let his followers do so. When one drew a sword to defend him, Jesus insisted that weapon be put down, saying those who live by the sword die by the sword. Now, there are many different ways that we can understand that death of Jesus. But one of them certainly wouldn't be that he was just meekly some lamb going to slaughter, no big deal. It was the action of someone who embodied what he taught. Jesus said, I say to you, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who wound or hate you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not even withhold your shirt. Do not be judged, and you will not. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given unto you. A good measure, pressed down and shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. Now, this translation that we have from Luke, interestingly enough, may not be all that well translated into English. And this is not a very well kept secret. Scholars have various theories about how what is written originally in the Greek really should be understood. Scholar Walter Wink posits that the word antastenai, that original word in Greek, really we should understand that first century technical term this way. You see, the Roman legions, when they fought in battle, had this way in which they stood against. They would stand shield to stand against or march against another. So to stand against, antastenai, to stand against, somehow now has been translated as resist not. That's a little different, isn't it? So do not resist. I really can't hear Jesus saying, yeah, don't resist evil. Don't worry about it, turn the other cheek. Yeah, walk away. The situation will just go away. Give the person your tunic, your undergarments. Go ahead. I can't find that in my gospel. Can you find that in yours? Translation is important. A translation that doesn't fully communicate the meaning doesn't communicate the power of the message. There's power in saying, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. And I was raised knowing this. And that full impact came through in the language of that Buddhist monk. There's something very right in that context and hearing it. And our context is important. So Jesus' context is that someone will backhand a lesser. So Jesus is saying in his context, those who think they are above you, a master to a servant, a male to a female, backhanded, maintain your position and offer your left cheek. In so doing, you have created a cultural and political dilemma for the person, the people, the system that is oppressing you. By turning your cheek, servant, female, whoever, it makes it impossible for the master to use the back of the hand. Because someone who believes they are superior in first century Rome. When you turn your cheek, your nose gets in the way. This cheek now offers the perfect target and the only target for a blow with the palm of the hand or the fist. And here's what we know from historic sources. A master or someone who believes they're superior will go to any length not to establish an underling as an equal. So this act of standing your ground and not cowering, this act of defiance, renders the master incapable of asserting dominance in the relationship. By turning the cheek, the inferior is saying, I'm a human being, fully and completely just like you. I refuse to be humiliated any longer. I'm your equal and I will not take it anymore. So if this is the case, as scholars such as Walter Wink say, and if this is correct, and if this part of my sermon is perhaps just a refresher course for folks who have heard this all before, because let's say this theory has been around and, I don't know, at least since the 60s and 70s, right? What does it mean to us in 2022? Because Jesus makes it clear that if someone smites you on the right cheek, turn the other also. I don't know about you, but in 2022, I'm not simply going to go up to someone and say, hey, smite me on my cheek, smite me on my cheek. It doesn't mean anything and it's lost its context. Our context and our daily living define us just as it did in Jesus' time. So how are we supposed to faithfully follow today? We don't use that language. That cultural custom doesn't mean anything anymore. But the system Jesus was describing still exists. That system that wants us to believe we have two choices. We can cower in submission, or we can resort to some kind of violent retaliation. We know this system. Any of you seen a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie? How about Liam Neeson? Have any of you watched Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons? How about Popeye, Olive Oyl, and Pluto? Violence, smashed down, eat my spinach. I'm big and strong, now I pop you down. And what's the context of the next cartoon? It's the exact same thing, isn't it? Wow, I got nothing. Okay, how about Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote? Watch these cartoons? Is the plot different, ever? Thank you. Okay, so I will not use Popeye examples anymore. But it's the same plot line in terms of violence begetting violence. So we have two choices. Now, the followers of the gospel are being led to see a third way, a creative technique in nonviolent resistance, designated to create trouble, a powerful peace for the powers that be. This third way looks a little like this, and you'll know all of these examples. You see, the year was 1773, and a group of British subjects were a little outraged by a Tea Act that was designed to make a monopoly on the market. And so they did something with the tea in Boston, didn't they? Right? An act of civil disobedience. The year was 1930, and a man named Gandhi thought it was unfair that Britain was taxing the salt that was readily available from the water. And so he did something, and tens of thousands joined him as he walked 240 miles to the Arabian seacoast to get salt. And then what they didn't expect when they arrested him was that part of that walk was that they would be greeted with well-wishers once they arrested Gandhi and the others. How amazing is it to be greeted with well-wishers when you arrest someone for civil disobedience? Back here in the US, you may have heard of someone named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks. How about this story of a squatter community in South Africa that got no results when lice infested their shelters? So they simply got their blankets and took them to the administrator's office and left them on the floors. Surprisingly, results came fairly quickly after that. You see, our context begins to define our actions. How about also in South Africa when a woman during the time of apartheid was walking down the street and a man spat on her and she paused and said, "Thank you, sir, and now for my children." The man had no response. You see, she was led by people like Bishop Tutu, who, while walking on a construction site that had only the width of one person, encountered a white man on one side. He was here. The white man said, "I don't give way to guerrillas." And Bishop Tutu stepped aside with a sweeping gesture and said, "Ah, but sir, I do." Yes, yes. You see, you may know a place called Westboro Baptist. And you may know that there are counter-protesters that now begin to assemble when they assemble. And you may understand that counter-protesters, as they gather, will begin to lock arms, just as they did at the funeral for those that died from the tragedy at the Pulse nightclub. And arm in arm, the protesters sang hymns like Amazing Grace and blocked the entryway for Westboro Baptist to come through and to stay nigh, and to stay nigh, to stand, shields up, to stand at the ready, to peacefully resist. God's presence standing against systematic evil, those things that oppress. We stand. And what is it that we stand for? Not what do we stand against. What do we stand for? You see, there were times when a pastor could easily get him or herself in trouble. If it were World War I or World War II, I could declare the enemy and get myself thrown out of a job so fast. But now, modern day examples, if I wanted to name those hot button issues and ask us what we stand for, maybe it's a little trickier. If I say we are called, we are told to do good to those who hate us, Who comes to mind? If I say that so-and-so just cut you off in traffic, do the words that come to mind when that happens, are those words, may God bless you and keep you? May God hold you in the palm of his hand and grant you peace? Perhaps they should be. When you see a yard sign or a billboard that just makes you go, perhaps, may God bless you and peace you. Peace you? May God bless you and keep you. May God hold you in the palm of his hand and grant you peace. When you find out that someone is vaccinated or unvaccinated, do you think to yourself, may God bless you and keep you? May God hold you in the palm of his hand and grant you peace? When you see someone wearing a mask or not, do you think to yourself or say out loud, may God bless you and keep you? May God hold you in the palm of his hand and grant you peace as we endure this time together? Maybe those hot button topics aren't so hard to find, and those people we call enemy aren't so elusive after all. Jesus is pretty darn clear who we are and whose we are, and if we claim the name Christian, what we are to stand for. May God bless us and keep us. May God hold us in the palm of God's hand. And may God grant us peace as we peacefully continue to figure this out together. Amen.